Russia's war in Ukraine is not exactly going as planned. In the beginning, they invaded from nearly every direction, heading straight at major cities across the country. Then, the invasion stalled, with very little progress being made over the next month. Then, Russia withdrew from the north. In the month and a half since, even less progress has been made. This isn't from a lack of effort though. Russia has been constantly attempting to advance, and some of those times with disastrous results, like what we saw here recently. There's many opinions on why Russia is having such a hard time in Ukraine, whether that's Russia performing a lot worse than expected, or Ukraine performing a lot better, Western aid such as weapon deliveries and intelligence, or even that Russia is doing just fine and that it's all just Western propaganda. In reality, it's probably at least a little bit of each of them. But the one that's the least talked about is the US and others providing intelligence on Russian forces to Ukraine. Reconnaissance and intelligence collections is absolutely vital in warfare, and it really seems to be costing Russia a lot here. There's many methods the US uses, such as cyber or satellite imagery, but the one that Russia probably has the best chance of stopping would be intelligence collected by aircraft. And we've seen a whole bunch of them gathering intelligence near the Ukrainian border, such as the RC-135 Rivet Joint, E-8 J-Stars, Global Hawk drones, and more. These are openly providing information to Russia's enemy, Ukraine, and it's resulted in many of their troops and vehicles being destroyed, reportedly even the sinking of their flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, as well as possibly contributing to many of Russia's failures in Ukraine. This, combined with the fact that the West has been openly giving weapons to Ukraine, could be viewed as an act of war to Russia, and it's not really all that difficult to imagine how they could justify shooting down these aircraft directly assisting Ukraine as just self-defense. So, why haven't they? But real quick, this video's sponsor, Ridge Wallet. Wallets are annoying. They're big and bulky and a pain to carry around or even sit down with it in your pocket. Ridge Wallet solves that. They're slim and easily slides into your pocket. They hold up to 12 cards, plus room for cash, as well as RFID blocking technology to protect you from digital pickpocketers. They have more than 30 styles and colors, and they're made to last and backed up with a lifetime warranty. In fact, they're so confident you'll love it, they'll give you a 45-day test drive. You try it out, and if you don't love it, send it back and they'll give you a full refund. So go over and check them out at ridge.com/covert. And with the code COVERT, you'll get an extra 10% off. Again, Ridge Wallet. The US and allies openly supplying weaponry and intelligence to Ukraine is interesting. Often in the past, you would try to hide your involvement to avoid escalation. For example, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, where the CIA secretly supplied weapons to fight the Soviets. They even went so far as to provide only Soviet weaponry, which they got from countries like Israel, China, and Egypt to avoid discovery. That, however, did change later on in the war when they began sending US-made equipment like the Stinger missile. Publicly arming and providing intelligence to another country that's at war has a lot of risks. An interesting scenario might be to try to imagine how the US would have reacted if, say, Russia or China was overtly sending the Taliban advanced weaponry to destroy US tanks and vehicles back when the US was still fighting there. So, if Russia did feel that this crossed a red line and that they needed to act, they would have a few options. Those could range anywhere from sanctions and other political pressure, to cyber attacks, to being more direct and intercepting them or even shooting them down, or attacking the bases in Europe that they're operating from, to the most extreme options, declaring war on the US and any country helping Ukraine, or even nuclear war. Russia doesn't have a lot of political influence left in Europe right now. Russia's cyber attacks have been limited, possibly in fear of a US retaliatory cyber attack on Russia. So, next up the escalation ladder is intercepting or even shooting down those aircraft. The main concern for Russia is the US and others actively getting involved in the war, such as launching cruise missile strikes, sending in fighter jets and bombers, ground forces, etc. So they would have to decide whether shooting down these aircraft assisting Ukraine would provoke that response. Even if they just shoot down unmanned aircraft or drones so that no Western pilots are killed could be a later option. After all, the US did not attack Iran after it shot down a Global Hawk in 2019, for example. But Russia hasn't done this, so it's possible Russia just considers it too risky. The other factors are whether Russia could actually shoot them down, and whether doing so would even make a big enough difference. They do have a large air force, and they've shown that they've been able to fly out and intercept US recon aircraft in the Black Sea, as well as other areas in the past. However, we've seen that there's been fighter escorts flying near these recon aircraft that could possibly respond. NATO itself recently released this graphic saying that they keep up to 30 aircraft on patrol along Russia's border at any given time, so it would be somewhat of a risk for Russia. Another option would be using air defense. The S-400's 40 N6 missile has an incredibly long range. The sites in Crimea could cover nearly the entire Black Sea, and the one in Belarus, if placed in the west, could theoretically cover half of Poland, including Rzeszów, where cargo aircraft are believed to be dropping off weapons that are then sent by ground into Ukraine. And these recon aircraft are slow and not very maneuverable, making them much easier targets. So Russia in theory does have the capability. However, as we've seen, Russia's military is not exactly turning out to be as effective as previously thought. And then, finally, would it really make that much of a difference in the war for Russia to do so? The cargo aircraft delivering weapons could just land further away and then ship their weapons a longer distance across land. As for recon aircraft, well, that really depends on what type of intelligence they're able to gather and how much of that then they provide to Ukraine. Aircraft are great for gathering intelligence. Unlike satellites, they can stay over an area and monitor it continuously while still staying close enough for their sensors to be most effective. They can also move around and observe a location from different directions, helping triangulate things like radars from signals it detects. And this brings us to the first type of intelligence they're gathering, SIGINT, or signals intelligence. This includes detecting things like signals from radars and air defense sites to build up a picture of what the enemy has, how many they have, and where they are. It also includes radio signals from communications. While these are often encrypted and they cannot be decrypted quick enough to use what's being sent, it's still valuable, again, in locating where the broadcast is coming from, or possibly knowing who it's being sent to, how often, and the volume of communications being sent, identifying patterns and signatures, and also to use all that information to conduct electronic warfare. Signals intelligence is an extremely valuable field that's rarely talked about. There's many times where often the only way you can detect your enemy and discover their plans is through signals intelligence. It can include everything from detecting and mapping large air defense radars, down to troop cell phone signals, tracking their locations and their movement from it. And this is exactly what the RC-135 rivet joint is doing while it's orbiting near Ukraine. The Block 30 Global Hawks carry a mix of sensors, including signals, but also electro-optical, infrared, and synthetic aperture radar systems. And now the Block 40s with the AESA radar, and the ability to detect moving objects from clutter. These systems allow you to detect and track ships at sea, vehicles on the ground, troop movements, and all either visually or thermal to get a better picture to distinguish between hot and cold, or create SAR imagery that can see through clouds and other bad weather. Global Hawks can stay airborne for 30 hours and they fly at incredibly high altitudes, and we regularly see them flying off the coast in the Black Sea. And finally, airborne search radars, such as this E-3 Century AWACS flying over Romania, that can monitor the skies for Russian aircraft. And all this intelligence can be extremely useful, giving you advance notice of an attack, locating enemy forces and knowing what they have, providing precise coordinates that can be used to attack them, or even discovering weaknesses or gaps or other vulnerabilities in your enemy's forces. During World War I, for example, French airborne recon aircraft discovered that the Germans had exposed their entire right flank while they were advancing, trying to cut off Paris. The French and British then used this information to attack, and they sent the German forces into a retreat that lasted for 65 kilometers where they finally stopped to build trenches, which led to the famous trench warfare and the resulting stalemate that World War I is known for. This intelligence gathered by aircraft completely changed the course of the war from an all but certain French defeat to an eventual victory. So the information gathered can be incredibly valuable. The US has stated that there are some limits on what information they share with Ukraine, such as not providing precise targeting information to take out senior Russian military officers or attack targets outside of Ukraine. However, those lines are not exactly clear. Some US officials said they provided intelligence to Ukraine of the location of the Moskva, which was technically outside of Ukraine. We also know that several Russian generals have died, possibly from US provided intelligence, and also what exactly is considered precise targeting information can be a gray area. But clearly all this information gathered can be extremely helpful for Ukraine, who doesn't really have any ability to gather it themselves on such a grand scale. So, in the end, Russia probably does have the ability to at least shoot down some of these aircraft, and they are providing intelligence that is at least on some level hurting Russia's operations. So it's most likely that Russia has come to the conclusion that it's just not worth the risk of escalation, which could cause a much larger and possibly even nuclear war.